We're going to kick off this session with another announcement. This is going to be announcement number 2 of the summit. And what I'm going to do is elaborate on something that Daniel introduced earlier today. It's a program that we're calling Summer of Reproducibility. And the motivations for doing this within the world of federated learning is there is a crisis all across machine learning more generally. So if you read papers such as this one that appeared in Science, people are starting to realize that the challenge in being able to reproduce others' results and the difficulty in building others' techniques and then comparing against them accurately is holding back the science. And we have noticed in the world of federated learning that this is a very acute instance of this more global problem. We're not the only ones. A number of people working in federated learning have realized that this challenge exists and have worked very hard to start to close that gap. And so if I think of work such as LEAF, if I think of efforts to build data sets such as Flambly, and countless of individual researchers and groups open sourcing their efforts, they've done a wonderful job in narrowing this gap, but nonetheless, it still remains. And so federated learning, given its nature of combining machine learning with distributed systems and various other kinds of computer science, still sort of has this issue that we need to address. And so what we want to do this summer is really start to accelerate this process. And the way we want to accelerate this process is how we do many things in Flower by working with the community. What I want to do is outline in 3 slides what this will look like in the coming months. And then by the end of June, we're going to release a document that sort of goes through the nitty-gritty details of this. Because obviously, when you run a sort of a challenge of this kind, the devil is really in the details of how it's going to work. But by the end of this sort of short announcement, you're going to have a good understanding of what's it going to feel like in the coming months. So let me introduce first the ambition. The ambition of the Summer of Reproducibility that we're going to be running inside Flower is to have a community-wide 3-month sprint. So what we want to engender is an outcome by the time summer ends, we've had a step change in the ability of reproduction of results within federated learning. And so our ambitious target is to have 50 open source Flower baselines. And so this is like a uniform way of representing a machine learning technique in the world of federated learning. We want to have 50 of these implemented by the end of summer. And the key effort is to focus on what we're talking about here, effortless reproducibility. Because it's no good if we have hundreds potentially of open source efforts, if a person has to then study the documentation and the internals and everything about that open source particular one-off technique for them to compare against. And so a key dimension to this is that by having everyone normalize to a standard of documentation and a way of structuring their code, then when people want to reproduce that code, all they need to know is this one set of APIs. So that's a key part to this, effortless reproducibility. And then at the end of this summer, for this collective effort, we want to reach a point where it becomes the largest repository of federated learning implementations found anywhere. And that's the effort that we can actually achieve in a surprising amount of short time. We also want this to be, although it's a sprint over the summer, the intention here is that it's just the beginning of this journey of normalizing the way people can compare, measure, and then progress different kinds of federated learning. So what are the highlights? The highlights of this process are as follows. Challenge duration is going to be July, August, and September. The unit of contribution, so how do people participate? The unit of contribution will be a Flower baseline. And that's important because it includes the structuring of the documentation, the code, unit tests of how it's worked, APIs that people can just blindly use it without having to understand the internals. So that's the unit of contribution. And then one question you might be asking yourself is, hey, I actually have an implementation that works. Maybe you used Flower to build it already. Isn't this cheating? And we're saying no. That's what we want to see happen first. The low-hanging fruits of people using things like Flower or perhaps open sourcing their own implementation and then looking at the Flower baseline, common set of APIs and design and aligning with that is a great way we can get started. So first of all, if you've got open source implementations using Flower or not, that's a great place to start. And we also, to the best of our abilities, will make this competition global. So there are a few restrictions in the ability to provide monetary awards to different locations in the world, but to the best of our ability, we will do so. And the details, the fine-grained details of that type of issue is going to be expressed in this document that we'll come up with. In total, over the 3 months, we'll be distributing $100,000 to the community to help bootstrap this effort. And I've been emphasizing this is really just the highlight reel of how it'll be. Obviously, there'll be a lot of details that we need to express very shortly in late June for a kickoff on this actual initiative 1st of July. But what I can do for you is explain the 3-step process of how we can imagine people will participate within this challenge. And so we've structured this within this open source model. And so step 1, somebody who wants to participate will come up with sort of a plan. They want to take this particular implementation. They want to take implementation that they've maybe read in a paper and they want to sort of refine it. They'll propose a plan by opening an issue within the existing repository of Flower, and they'll get feedback from the Flower team. They might say to them, this seems great. Have you considered some other implementations? Have you considered other papers when you're thinking of implementing this particular technique and so on? You'll get feedback, and eventually you'll refine your plan that you start off by opening this issue. And once you've concluded that step 1, gotten feedback, nailed down your plan through opening an issue in the repository, you can advance to stage 2, whereas we expect people to spend most of their time. Most of the time, they'll be working to develop the solution, test it, see what happens when they try to reproduce plots from a paper to evaluate and understand if the implementation is correct. And then they'll spend most of the time doing that. During this process, they'll be able to get feedback from the Flower team, the core developers, but also the community at large. And then finally, in stage 3, folks will start to merge that contribution. And so this really is the key step in concluding them providing a Flower baseline. And so for them to merge the contribution, they'll need to do unit tests. There'll be some tests to do with compatibility of the Flower baseline and so on. There'll be some inspection to make sure it looks fine. But once that's done, they will be provided with a $2,000 award for completing a contribution. And so we hope to see this happen 50 times, happen over the summer, for us to reach a point where we have these set of open source implementations for everyone to use, and importantly, accessible via an API that's consistent across all 50, which is again a key dimension that we currently lack. So that is the overview and the announcement. There'll be further information coming up shortly. But with that, I'm going to move on to the next session. Maybe I'll take 1 or 2 questions, if there are any, about this before I move on. Yeah, Sven, right?
Well, I think there's a very powerful in that. I think it will broaden the adoption of Flower. But my question is, after this 50 or I don't know, 1 year, maybe 100 contributions out there, what is your long-term plan for maintaining this? Because I guess the major transition in Flower, you have to update all these 100 implementations, then how is this supposed to work?
Well, I suppose Daniel might want to say something on this. I don't have a microphone. Repeat. Oh, so the question was, so if you have this 50 implementations, or if you have even more, then Flower changes, how are you going to maintain these baselines in the face of Flower potentially moving over time? And then Daniel was going to say, maybe you want to come to this laptop, since that's where the microphone is.
So yeah, very good question, and we thought about this, and our hypothesis is that the more baselines we have, that there's some shared components between these baselines, and then over time we intend to move these shared components into sort of separate section within the baselines project. And then, for example, if there's a new strategy, then that strategy could move into the core framework, and we could just maintain it as part of the core framework. And then other baselines could start to use it for models and for data sets and related things that could move into a separate section within baselines, so that different baselines share the same model implementation, the same data set partitioning, and so on. So the effort to reduce an individual baseline would go down over time, so that we can maintain a larger set of baselines.
Great. One more question from Steph.
Yeah, so you're talking about the basically post publication and reproducibility. Is there a way to enhance or prioritize the reproducibility inside the cloud before it gets published? Like publishing, like the thing, I mean, like while, for example, our submission and you're trying for having a reproducible submission.
Do you want to read?
I guess the
Repeat the question. Yeah.
So the question we received in the room was that is this limited to only published papers, or could someone try to reproduce a paper that's under submission?
So for now, this is one of the details that we're still figuring out, but most likely the summer of reproducibility will be limited to published work, because that's already peer reviewed and things like that. Over time, obviously, anyone could open a pull request and say, hey, this is something we submitted. Here's the code for that, and we'd be happy to merge it if it's a valuable contribution. And I think with the baselines that we already have, it's a lot easier to start a new paper now, to just take one of these baselines and then build on top of it. And then you get a lot of the benefits in terms of reproducibility and so on already built in without having to invest a lot of effort.
Great, thank you.